this is some kind of breaking news. It was very awkward on Wednesday. What happened was, right before we were waiting for Coach Pop online on the Zoom call. And then before he comes in, the Spurs announced that LaMarcus Aldridge would be out. And they just said, he's not. And the reason why was he didn't have an injury. He was just not with the team. And we were like, it was like minutes before Pop came on. Then, of course, we asked Pop about that. And he did say that, because of the situations the Spurs are in, where they're ready to they and LaMarcus agreed that they were going to mutually agree to part ways. Now, Pop didn't define what that means, whether it's trade or buyout. But those are the only two options the Spurs have in terms of moving on from Aldridge. So then, right after Pop's interview, and we basically knew that the Spurs and Aldridge are moving on. Woj, of course, broke some news where he says that the Spurs are working on trades on several fronts. He said that a trade could be found within the week, so maybe it comes before Wednesday this week if that's going to hold. And then he also said at the moment there's no movement toward a buyout, but we know that if they can't get a trade done within these next 12 days, which the deadline is on the 25th of March, then they would have to seek a buyout. Now, there hasn't been any reputable sourcing here. There's a lot of teams coming out if Aldridge gets bought out. Teams like Portland, like the Lakers, et cetera. There's different names, Philly's out there as well. But as far as teams that are looking to trade for him, the only reputable source I found so far, again, that you and I recorded this on Saturday morning, is Barry Jackson of the Miami Herald reported that the Heat have expressed interest in Aldridge, but actually because of the difficulty in a trade for Aldridge at the moment, right now they actually have more interest in Rudy Gay. So again, there hasn't been a lot of reporting on who's exactly interested in Aldridge in terms of trades. So some of the big challenges though of moving him, is that his salary is $24 million. So that's pretty tough to move a player at $24 million who was coming off the bench, who wasn't even playing well with his own team, was a liability on defense is what we saw there. So some other complications why it's hard to move Aldridge is because they only have one extra roster spot, the Spurs. Right now they're at 14 guarantee contracts, and then they have, of course, the 2 G League players. But the difficulty means that if you're putting a trade together for Aldridge, then and let's say you're sending LaMarcus somewhere, well, then you can only bring back 2 players at minimum. If you bring back more than 2 players, then you have to either waive someone, probably Drew Eubanks, because he's making the least amount of money on this team in terms of the long-term players, and that's difficult because Eubanks is actually playing very well for them when he gives them when he gives them minutes. Or you have to get a third team involved to try to move one of those extra players coming to the Spurs to that third team, and the reason why that's difficult is because if most teams are above the salary cap at this moment, and in order to create any kind of trade for LaMarcus, if you're over the salary cap, you have to at least build $19 million in salary. And that's tough because that usually takes about 3 players to do that. Some teams can do it with 2 players, but most teams, it takes at least 3 players to build a package of $19 million for Aldridge. Now, since I mentioned the Heat, Bobby Marks, made a video where he recently, just talked about all the complications with this. And one package he put together, which is obviously very difficult, is maybe a player like Kelly Olynyk, Avery Bradley, and Maurice Harkless for Aldridge. This is a 3-for-1 swap. This is tough because then, the Spurs would either have to waive a player to bring in those 3 players, or they'd have to trade someone to make this happen, or get a third team involved. There might be some teams that are desperate to get in, like teams that have been out of the playoffs for multiple years. I feel like they might be just desperate to get a player where they think they can give Aldridge an expanded role, keep him as a starter. And we see that he just doesn't work out as a third or fourth option on offense these days. I know he's expanded his game out to the 3-point line. I know he still does the pick and pop mid-ranger, but like in terms of like if you make him your first or second option, we see that he just wants to post up, and a lot of those are just those turnaround over the shoulder type of shots. He doesn't really get to the free throw line these days. He doesn't really score a lot in the paint. His number of paint shots are very low, and so that's one part, is like how do these teams evaluate him? I agree with you that if it's a team who's trying to chase a championship, well, then they're going to tell him right immediately, you're probably going to come off the bench, and that's going to be it. You're only going to be allowed to score against second units, because these temes don't want to lose anything on defense if they're already trying to compete for a championship. They know that any team that's getting Aldridge, they know that he's really just slipped defensively, and that's one of the key reasons why the Spurs have decided to move on from him, because Jakob Poeltl is just so much better, even Drew Eubanks as well as an option there. So I think that's the big question. I think that if he does get moved, it's going to be to a team that is actually really desperate to at least just get into the playoffs. If they think that, hey, we can make LaMarcus our second or third option here, keep him as a starter, kind of what he was comfortable doing, then maybe that's that team. There's a team out there. Now, as far as, I know that the $24 million is really difficult to move because of all the things we talked about. But there are some teams out there, who can kind of make him fit pretty quickly. And those are so one team to mention is Boston. I know that right now it doesn't look like they have any interest in him just because they have multiple bigs already. They have Tristan Thompson, they have Robert Williams, they have I forgot there was one other player they have. Oh, Daniel Tice. Yeah, and a lot of those players, defensively just fit so much better than Aldridge. And so the Celtics, the reason why I mentioned them is because they do have this $28.5 million trade exception, which means that they could basically trade for Aldridge and fit him into that exception. Now, what that would do for Boston is two issues. They would put them in the tax, which do they want to pay that just for, an Aldridge? Aldridge, a player who we just mentioned all the issues that he's going to bring for them. And then two is, they'd also have to waive two players because they are hard capped. So they can't quite just make it so easy as, let's just trade for LaMarcus. They actually have to waive two players. Then another team to keep in mind is the Thunder. They have a big trade exception as well, $27.5 million, I believe. Wow. And again, that can just fit LaMarcus in quickly at his $24 million. But then OKC in that terms is OKC desperate to try to chase a playoff spot? So then maybe they make Aldridge one of their core pieces starting alongside SGA and Lou Dort, or are they just doing this to try to get an asset from the Spurs where they're telling the Spurs, hey, we'll take LaMarcus, yeah, we can trade for him, but we want a second round pick or something. We want some sort of future asset. And so
we're doing you a favor by
exactly
taking him off your hands. Give us something else.